through how I've used the Palazzo Pants trouser pattern to make a pair of high-waisted paper bag shorts or high-waisted paper bag trousers. So I actually started by hacking the Palazzo Pants. So I've actually attached the pocket because I wanted that side seam line there, and I actually just wanted to eliminate that pocket altogether. Then I slightly raised the waistline. So this is my hacked pattern. So everything is matching in the front seam and the crotch and the waist here. And then I've raised the waist by 2 centimeters. So when I did that, I have just taken those pleat lines and also raised them by 2 centimeters and just followed that out. I also made the trousers wider. So the inner leg seam I've just taken straight down. The outer leg seam I've curved around and taken straight down to make it really wide. And I've done a similar thing on the back of the pattern also. So the crotch and that centre back seam has stayed the same. I have actually kept the dart the same as well. I've not altered that at all. And then I have raised the waist by about 2 centimeters as I did at the front so that they would match. And I've taken that inner leg seam straight down, and that outer leg seam I've done the same as I did on the front. I've curved it and then taken it straight down. So we've got some wide, very, very wide leg palazzo trousers with the pocket eliminated and the waist slightly raised. So this is how I've hacked the hack to create the paper bag waist. Now I have kept the crotch the same and I've kept the outer leg the same. So I've got a nice wide leg short. If I didn't want them to be that wide, I could actually just use my original palazzo pant pattern, but I wanted them that bit wider. The tricky bit came when I had to trace the pleats. So if I had have just traced the pleats straight up, I would have ended up with a really wide pleat and it wouldn't fit around my waist correctly. So what I did was I've raised the top by 8 centimeters, the waist, and I've taken the pleat line down to that top waistline, that original one, and I've actually traced my pleats down 8 centimeters rather than going the other way and extending them up, okay? So as you can see, those pleat lines don't match there, which is fine because they actually fit the waist better if you trace them down instead. Okay, so that was really important. I found that I tried it the other way first and it blundered, and so this is going to fit much nicer. And then on the back, I've traced the same lines for the crotch and the centre seam, and the same line for the outer seam there. So the only change that I've made to the dart at the back is that instead of extending the dart all the way up, I stopped it at that original Palazzo Pants line, so that was the 2 centimeters below, and I've actually gone straight up on a 90-degree angle rather than following that dart out like that, okay? So that's really important, otherwise you're going to take in way too much of your waistline and it will not fit your waist. Okay, the same at the front here. If we made those darts extend all the way up from where they were, it would have made that waistline really, really small. And I don't think anyone's waistline is that small, especially not mine. So then I moved on to the facing. Now the front facing is pretty much a replica of the front pattern, except that the front pant pattern has this centre front seam. So we want to eliminate that centre front seam, and we want to cut this waistband on the fold so that we don't have a seam in the middle at the front. So you need to remove that seam allowance from the pattern so that you don't get an extra large waistband that won't fit. Okay, so that's why that's a little bit shorter there. I've made my my facing 10 centimeters long, so that actually gives me just that little bit of space at the bottom to seal the edge off with my overlocker, fold it under, and stitch across my waistband so that this facing is attached to the inside of my trousers at the end when I'm doing my finishing. The back, you've got two options for the back. If you are having a side seam, a side zip, you will need to remove that seam allowance from the front and cut your fabric on the fold, okay, so that you don't have a seam in the middle of your back. You will instead be putting your zip down the side here. Everything else is an exact replica of the front, okay, it's 10 centimeters, just the same as the front facing was. And then you have the option of a centre back zip. So this one is an exact replica of the back. So I've kept that seam allowance there because my zip is going to go in the back here rather than in the side. All right, and you would have to cut two of those rather than cutting one of these on the fold. Okay, so that's what our pattern looks like. That's how, also the bottom of the shorts, if you're making shorts, I have cut 8 centimeters down from the crotch line, okay, and then taken it across. So that's the same on the front and back. If you're making trousers, leave it full length. If you want your shorts longer, go for it. If you want it shorter, that's up to you too. It's a real personal choice there. If you're lining your shorts, just ensure that when you cut your lining, you make it 8 centimeters shorter from the top down, because you're going to have your facing that is the same fabric as your shorts. So if you bring it down 8 centimeters, that gives you enough seam allowance to attach your lining to your facing later. I also generally just take a couple centimeters off the bottom because I hate it when my lining escapes my shorts and you can see it hanging out the bottom. So if I cut a little bit off to begin with, then I know I'm not going to run the risk of it being longer than my shorts at any stage. So make sure you would adjust your pattern for your lining on both the back and the front. So you bring it down 8 centimeters and start from 8 centimeters shorter on both. I've pinned my pattern to my fabric. I'm using a cotton linen blend from Spotlight. So I've used just over a meter, I think it was 115 centimeters for my pattern. This pattern is one directional, this print is one directional, I feel, so I've probably used a bit more than I needed, so you might need less fabric than that. So I've got the back facing, I'm cutting that on the fold. I only need one of those on the fold. I've got my front facing, one on the fold. I need 2 of my back, and I need 2 pieces of my front. Now this fabric is also quite light, so I'm going to need to line it. So I'm going to use a sandwash satin because I feel that that's quite nice against my skin, and it's quite nice and light. So I will only need to cut 2 back pieces and 2 front pieces of my lining because this facing is going to be essentially the lining for my waistband. I've cut out my pattern pieces and I've also traced all my pleats and my darts using my disappearing texture. So I'll just give you a quick look at that. So I've drawn on my fabric and on my lining, and I've done that on the tops of all of my fabrics or pieces, or my pattern pieces, like that, and also on my facings, front and back. Okay, So everything is marked up. Now there's a few important things that you need to know before you start so that you can get that facing right. So once you've constructed your shorts and you're ready to start your facing and your lining, it's really important that you are aware of how to construct these darts at the front and, the pleats at the front and the darts at the back. So here's a pair that I've made a few years ago. These are not lined, they just have the facing. So the first thing you need to do once you've constructed your shorts is you need to stitch your facing onto your shorts and understitch it so that it sits nice and flat. Okay, once you've done that, then you need to actually sew your darts and your facing at the same time so that they are stitched together. So that's your darts at the back, and here are your pleats at the front. Okay, so we're stitching our pleats together with the back facing. All right, so it's really important that you know that we're not doing them separately. We're not doing the pleats on the shorts and then doing the pleats on the facing and then sewing those two together. We're actually doing them at the same time. I've also only stitched from here to here on the pleats and the darts. If I had have stitched it all the way up, I would have lost my paper bag effect. So I have marked that on the pattern and I will show you that in a minute. Now, if you are lining your shorts, like I'm going to be doing with mine this time around, I'll show you what that's going to look like. These are a pair of shorts that I purchased, which I could have actually made, so silly me. So with these ones, I'm going to, once I've constructed my shorts, I'm going to need to sew my lining, which is already constructed, onto my facing. And then I'm going to have to sew my facing onto my shorts, understitch it like the other one, all right? And then sew my darts and my pleats together with the lining. All right, so have a look at that. And it's the same as on my ones, it's not stitched all the way up. So that's how we get the paper bag effect, okay? And it's all encased. So here's my pattern piece where I have the areas of the pleats and the darts that I'm actually going to stitch. So I've marked 2 centimeters up from the original pleat. So I'm going to start stitching there and I'm going to stitch 5 centimeters up to here, and I'm going to leave that remaining space, which is slightly different for each one, but it's about 4 to 5 centimeters for each one. So that will give me, with seam allowance, that will give me that little area there that's going to give the paper bag effect. And that's the same on my facing as well. I have the areas marked on my facing, so I'll stitch only to there, and it's also the same for my darts at the back. So I've got that 5 centimeter gap there where I'm going to stitch straight up. So obviously my dart is going to be completely stitched together all the way up to there, and then I'm going to continue stitching it straight up and stop here. I've pinned together my lining as well as my shorts, both sides. Just a quick tip, always make sure that when you're stitching, you go in the same direction for all of your seams, just in case any of your fabric stretches from your sewing machine. Everything will then at least stretch in the same way, so it won't warp and get uneven. I use my walking foot as much as I can anyway, so it helps to reduce any sort of stretch on the fabric. I've now stitched all my side seams and overlocked them, and I've also overlocked down the center seams of each piece as well, because that's where my zip is going to go, so it's now finished for later on. If you were going to put a side zip in, you would need to leave one of the side seams open and seal those edges so that you could stitch them later. So I'm going to put the shorts together now so that I can stitch the front back seam. The best way to do that is to turn one piece in the right way, like that, okay, and then put it inside the other piece. So one leg in the other leg, and match up the two center seams and pin them. And I'm just going to be stitching up the front seam because the back seam is where my zip is going to go. So I'm going to pin together that whole front seam, and then I'm going to stitch down to that seam at the inner leg. Okay, and I'll do the same for the lining. I've stitched together the front seams, center seams for both the lining and the shorts, fabric shorts, and I've ironed out that seam nice and flat, which is going to help with the zip later on. So now I'm ready to work on my facing for my waistband. So here's my front piece, so I'm going to lay that out flat. And when I was cutting my fabric, I actually cut this on the fold, which I didn't need to because the zip's going in the back there, so I've just sliced that so that that's open. So we'll make sure that goes on the right way. So this is the center side, so I need that one to go that way, so the center's there, and this is the center for that side, and I'm just going to pin those two sides together and stitch them down, and then I'll move on to pinning it to my shots. I've finished off the side seams of the waistband facing, so I've ironed those seams out, and I'm now going to attach this facing to the waistband. So this is the top of my facing, and I want to attach that to the top there. So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to start by pinning the side seams together, matching them up as best I can. And the one on the right. And then I will pin all across the top of that waistband and the backs as well. Okay, and I'm going to stitch that on just with my sewing machine. I'm not going to overlock that seam because I don't want to risk stretching the fabric, and I'll be using my walking foot to relieve some of that stress on the fabric as well. If you are not lining your shorts, then this is a good opportunity to finish off that raw edge of your facing, so you can overlock it if you wish, and also if you want to, you can hem it up so that the inside of your garment has a really nice clean finish. Once I have stitched this seam at the top, I will iron it out and understitch it so that we get a nice flush finish on that waistband. The facing is now attached to the waistband, so you can see it's all the way around there. I've also understitched the facing so that I get a nice sharp edge. If you're not sure what understitching is, it's when you iron your seam to one side and then you stitch close to the seam line, so that will make the seam allowance stay to that side, and then you iron it out and it stops your seam from rolling. Okay, so you get a nice flush, clean finish. So it's now time to attach the lining to the facing. So I'm just going to flip that facing out, okay, like that, and I'm going to get my lining, and with the right side facing the waistband, I'm going to match up my side seams. Oops. And on this side. And then once again, I'm going to pin all the way along the front of that facing, of that lining to attach it to the facing, and I'm going to pin all the way along that top of that lining and facing, and the same on the back like that. And then I'm going to stitch it and overlock it and iron it out. There's no need to understitch this, it can just be ironed out. The lining's all in now, so you can see the inside of my shorts is looking really nice and clean. I've just ironed down that seam line there, and I'm now going to move on to my zip. Now I'm going to put the zip in before I do all my darts and pleats, because that's when you do your darts and your pleats, that's going to be a really great opportunity to fix any sizing issues you may have. So if the zip is in already, you can make your pleats or your darts smaller or bigger depending on how it's fitting with the zip done up. So that's the next job. So I'm using a 25 centimeter invisible zip in mine. So I'm going to iron my zip and pin it on, and I'll show you how I install my zip. It's really important that you iron your zip out first. If you don't, you won't be able to stitch as close to the zip line as you'd like to. So you'll get a cleaner finish if you do iron your zip first. So I'm going to undo my zip and lay it out on my fabric like this. So this side of my zip I'm going to turn over, and I'm going to find the little plastic bit at the top, and I'm going to line that up with the top of my seam line there. That's the top of my shorts. And I'm going to pin across so that it's less likely that that pin is going to move. Okay, and then I'm going to follow my seam line, my edge, and I'm going to pin it all the way down. As far down as I can. All the way to the bottom. Alright, so I'm now going to stitch as close as I can along that zip line there, as far down as I can go until my zip gets in the way, and then I'll close my zip up, and then I'll stitch in the rest of my zip down to the bottom. Alright, so I'm about to stitch in my zip. So I've got my zipper foot, and I've moved my needle all the way to the left. And I'm going to start right at the top there. I'm going to put my needle in and take my zip out, my pin out, sorry. And I'm just going to back stitch that. And now I'm going to try and stay as close to that zip side as I can all the way through. Make sure your zip's all the way down. Get to a point where you can't go any further because that zip's in the way. So keep your needle down and zip up your zip if you can. And if you can't, like I can't just now, just back stitch that. And it's fine to just start again. So we'll zip that up. Start back in the same spot as far over as you can. Don't forget to back stitch. And stitch all the way to the end. And snip any threads as close as you can so they don't get caught in your zip. Okay, so now for the other side, we're going to bring the other side up together, undo your zip. Okay, now this one's going to go on this side, so we want to flip it over that way. Get your little plastic top of your zipper right at that fold line, that seam line again, and put in your pin sideways. And then pin it down all the way along. All the way to the bottom. If you sew this in backwards, don't feel silly. I've done it a million times and I will probably do it a million more times. And that's okay. I feel silly every time, but that's okay. All right. Now I'm going to move my needle to the right. And I'm going to stitch down along the right hand side. And the same as for the left side of the zip, just try and bring that zipper up. I'm actually just going to seal it off. And I'm going to bring that zipper up. It's a bit tricky because I haven't ironed it yet, so the fabric catches a little. Okay, so you can see that zip's looking really good already, but we need to finish this bit off. So I'm just going to flip this around and finish off the end of this zip. In as far to the side as possible. should be nicely finished off with that zip. Okay, check that you can zip it up and down and make sure that there's no little loose ends that might get caught in the zip at some stage. So now we're going to sew the lining into the zip. So to do that, we're opening our zip up and we're going to fold the top over right on that seam line, okay? So fold it over right on that seam line, so you should be able to see those stitches at the top there. Those stitches there is what we want, so we've folded it over. This little taggy bit needs to come right to the side, otherwise you'll be able to see it. Okay, so the tag's pulled out, the stitches are at the top, and we're going to pin that together just there. Now we're going to pin all the way down along the zip here. We don't have to get super close to the zip for this lining to be sewn in. You don't want to actually sew on the zip. If you do sew on the zipper, you will ruin the zipper and you won't be able to open and close it. So just give it a little bit of space from where the actual zipper is. And pin all the way down to the end of your zip. Okay. Get in there. Right. So as I said, we don't want to be too close to the zipper because we don't want to run the risk of ruining it. So we're just going to start a little bit to the side of it. Now it's always tricky to start this because it's quite thick at the top. So I always start a little bit further down and just back stitch it. Okay, so needle down. And I'm going to back stitch it up. And that doesn't want to move, it's too thick. Move it over just a little bit more, see if that'll work. It's very stubborn sometimes. And you have to give it a little bit of a helping hand. Push it through the best you can. Eventually it'll give in and it'll do as it's told. Through to the bottom. Make sure you don't catch the other side. Otherwise you'll be doing some unpicking and we all hate that. So when I turn it through, it should all be nicely encased. Like so. So that's the front and that's the back. Alright, I'm going to do the same for the other side. Okay, so our zip is all stitched in to the lining and pulled through and it's looking quite good. Alright. So the next part is that we need to finish off these seams down to the crotch. So to finish off that seam at the back, I want to stitch in my seam around here and all the way through down to the bottom. So I'm just going to go in through that bottom leg. Okay, and I'm going to find my seam for my fabric, and I'm going to try and line that zipper up, make it flat as possible so I don't get any bunching. And I need to join it above where the zip ends. So I'm kind of feeling it's about there. Okay, and that's going to stitch that seam at the zip. Okay, and then I need to stitch the rest of that seam. I need to make sure that I don't have any of that zipper showing through, so the seam might need to be a little bit larger through that crotch area. So I'm going to pin that through. To join it up to where I've pinned there. Okay, and I might just fix that one up because I don't like it. I'm getting some bunching, which I'm not happy about. All right, let's finish that seam. I should really change my foot, but I'm a bit lazy, so I'm not going to. I'm going to move it to the right so that I can get close to that zipper. Make sure that there's nothing that's going to get caught in there. Make sure all your seams are out. Okay, and we'll check how that went. So I'm going to pull it through. Happy with that. It's come out nice and smoothly. So I'm going to do the exact same process for the lining on the inside. So I'm going to go through the leg again. Find that zipper. Once again, find a spot to join it at the zip. Making sure you get an even amount on both sides. It's a bit tricky. And then pin all the way down to that crotch seam. again, make sure there's nothing in the way. And that should be all nicely encased now. Alright, it has brought it in quite a bit. I might have to fix that up actually. It's a bit far. The lining always does seem to come in quite a bit more than the outer, but that's okay, as long as we're nice and smooth on the outside, which we are. Alright, so I'm going to iron that zip now. Alright, so that zip is now installed. You can see it's laying nice and flat, and I'll show you what it looks like on the inside. It's looking pretty good. I did have to fix this up because I did manage to catch some of the side fabric, which is why it looked so atrocious before. So anyway, it's installed now, it's been ironed out, and I'm happy with it. So the next step is to install the darts in the back and the pleats in the front, and I'll be making sure to try it on as I do that so that I can make any adjustments to the sizing with the pleats and the darts if needed. So I'm starting with the darts. So I've lined those up and pinned them on, so fabric and lining. So I'm going to stitch that dart and I'm going to stop at this point here, and I'm going to do the same for the other dart, and then I'll do the same with all the pleats. So I've finished the pleats and the darts now, and they've all been ironed towards the center seams. So the pleats on the front towards the center seams and the darts on the back towards the center seam. And I'm really happy with how they've turned out. I've tried it on and I've adjusted, I actually adjusted the darts on the back to make it fit a little better. So now I'm going to hem the bottom, and then I'm going to add some features, like some belt loops, and I'll make a belt to go with it. So I've hemmed my shorts and they're pretty much finished. So I'll give you a look at those. So that's what we should be looking like. All of my paper bag features have been ironed into the centers, so the center front and the center back. Now, as you can see, these shorts are in dire need of some detail around the waistline. So what I'm going to do now is make some belt loops, and I'm going to place them around, and then I'm going to make either a tie or a belt to go with these to give a little bit of definition around that waist. And I'll show you what I do. So I'm going to cut a piece of bias for my belt loops. So I've folded my fabric over on that 45-degree angle, and I'm going to make it about 1.5 inches long. So I'm going to line up my ruler on that side line there and make sure that it's square with the bottom of my fabric. Okay, so it's 1.5 inches wide. I'm going to cut that. So I've got a strip. I don't know how long I'm going to need it. I can always cut more if I need to. So I'm going to fold that over backwards, and I'm going to stitch along that side seam, and then I'm going to turn it through and iron it flat to make my loops, and then I'll just cut them to the sizes that I want. Alright, so I have stitched my cord and now I'm going to pull it through. So I'm going to show you my little trick for pulling it through. There's lots of different tricks that people use, so I'm just using this one today. These are elastic threaders or cord threaders, but I'm going to use it for this purpose. So you put your fabric in the middle and then you push up the little ring and it grips onto it. So I've left a scraggly little end here so I don't ruin my loop. So I'm just going to pop that in there, and I'm going to grip it onto that scrappy end, which is much easier when no one's watching. Okay, and I'm going to push up my little loop, my ring, so it's holding on nice and tight. And now I'm just going to thread that down through my cord. And it should pull through nice and easily. Now the other end. Okay, so it's pulled through, and now I'm going to go and iron it flat so that this seam is on the back, so that when I put my belt loops on my shorts, you will not see any seam at all. My belt loops are now finished, so I have ironed them flat and cut them to size. So I'll give you a little look. You can see there's a back seam there, and then I've just ironed them flat, and I've cut each one to 7 centimeters in length. And I had enough that I can create a nice little feature with my belt loops. So I'm actually going to have double loops. So I'm going to have 2 at that front pleat there, and I'm going to have 2 on this front pleat here. And I'm purposely mismatching the fabric so that they stand out because they are a feature. I don't want them to blend in. Okay, and then I also have 2 on the back here, either side of the dart, and 2 on the back here, either side of that dart. So with my belt loops, I'm going to start right here where my pleat has begun being stitched, and I'm going to pin my dart, sorry, wrong pleat, pin my belt loop just there next to that dart. Okay, just leaving about a 1 centimeter seam allowance there, and then I'm going to fold up the bottom about 1 centimeter. I'm going to lay that nice and flat, and I'll stitch that one down second. So that's going to give me enough space. I'm planning on having a 4 centimeter tie or belt. I haven't decided yet. So that's going to give me enough space to stitch those onto my shorts and leave about 4 centimeters for a belt or a tie to slide through. So I've pinned on all my belt loops, and just to show you, I have pinned them on at 4.5 centimeters down from the waist, the top of the waistband, and they're about 0.5 centimeter apart each. So I've done that on all of my belt loops to make them the same, and I will sew them about 1 centimeter up from the bottom. So this is how I do my belt loops. So I've stitched those on. I'm going to iron them down flat now. Okay, and then I'm going to fold the top down, and I'm measuring because I want them all to be the same, so it's 1 centimetre. I'm ironing the top down. And then I'm trying to make it nice and straight so that it follows that seam line for that pleat, and I'm making sure that everything's tucked under nice and neatly. I'm going to pin that one on there. And I'm going to do the same for this one. Put it down about 1 centimetre. That's right. And I want to make sure they're roughly the same. So this one's actually a little bit shorter for whatever reason, so I'm going to re-iron that and make this just a tad shorter. And see if I can't make them match up better. That's better. Alright, so I want it to be nice and straight following that line of that pleat. They're straight along the bottom. So I'm going to pin that. And now I'm going to stitch across the bottom of each one. I've decided to use the D-rings for my belt. So I've got my fabric folded in half, and I'm going to use the entire width of my fabric, which is 140 centimeters. And I've neatened up that edge so that it's nice and straight. And I'm going to cut my fabric 10 centimeters deep so that I have 2 centimeters of seam allowance, and also that will allow me to fold my fabric over to make it into the belt. So I'm just going to cut that. And try not to move it. Okay, so that means now I can take my tie or my belt and I can fold it in half, and I can stitch it along that edge, and then turn it through, stitch it on the ends, turn it through, finish off the other end and iron it nice and flat, and then I'll thread it through my D-rings and stitch it onto those. So I've stitched my belt, so I've stitched one end across and then down all the way through to the other side, and I've left the other side open. So on the end that is stitched across, I'm going to start threading that through. So I'm just going to start it by hand because it's nice and big, so I can. And then I'm going to pop the end of this big fat knitting needle into there, and then it should just roll on nicely after that. Once I've got it through to the other end, I'm just going to try and push out those corners a little bit with that needle, and take the knitting needle out because I don't want it in there anymore. But I can use it while it's still a bit scrunched up. I can use it to just try and get those corners out a little nicer so that you get a nicer result. Okay, so I've got nice corners now. So I'll take my knitting needle out and the rest will just flow through. And now I'm going to iron it so that that seam there is on one side and it's all nice and flat. Alright, so this is now turned in the right way and it's all ironed nice and flat. So I'm going to take my unstitched end, and I have just folded that in and ironed it, and I'm going to put my D-rings on to that end. So I want my fabric on that side. So I'm going to put it through both my D-rings like that, and I'm going to stitch down on there. So I'm going to stitch across there to hold my D-rings in. So here are my finished shorts. Looking much better with the detail around that waistline. I'll just give you a look. I have double stitched this area here next to the D-ring to make sure that it's secure, and that's also sealed off that back edge of the end of the belt, and I'm just threading it through my belt loops and letting it hang. So I'm really happy with how mine have turned out. I hope you've enjoyed this hack, and good luck with your hack too. Can't wait to see what everyone else does.